Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Doom Patrol. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's start with Vic's side of things. Vic ended up hanging out with some old friends of his, and it is that awkward, complicated thing, because it's like, right, Vic is the friend that they've known, and they know him before the tragedies, kind of after the tragedy. They were there, they knew him before the world knew him as Cyborg, and it is this interesting thing where it's like, oh, like, whoa, where's all your tech? He's like, yeah, it's kind of going. It's like, oh, do you have your powers? And even then, eventually, the conversation is like, right, why are we spending the entire time talking about Vic this, Vic that? What about Derek? Derek's done a lot of stuff. Because I think this is interesting conversation about, like, right, Derek has done, a lot for the community. Like, he's done, like, kind of like some programs that kind of help, I think, youths of, like, the community and stuff. And I think the conversation could be like, oh, like, Vic hasn't really done that. Like, Vic's off been doing a superhero, not only leaving Detroit behind to some extent, but also, like, his friends, you know? And there is this complicated awkwardness because it's like, it seemed like Derek was the one that was the most kind of like, yeah, but it seems like he might have just been doing that as kind of overcompensating a little. Because, like, one of the other friends seemed like he was more kind of hesitant when it came to Vic. One seemed all about it. Derek seemed like he was like, yeah. And the other friend seemed like, meh about the whole Vic thing. Because it's like, right, you kind of left us behind and now you want to reach out, you know? And I love the whole thing. He's like, no, they're like, oh man, you never got to say goodbye to your mom. He's like, I did. He's like, they're like, what? He's like, yeah, I mean, the Doom Patrol, we kind of half died and saw the afterlife, which I loved. And I'm like, all right, it's the weirdness of the mundane the aspect of like, right, you having to explain, it's the DC universe, but you having to explain the weird corner of the DC universe you've been a part of for the past, the past 3 seasons of this show, and being like, oh yeah, like I kind of half died. It's like, man, Cyborg lives in a different world, which ends up being an interesting conversation because it's like, right, we live very different lives. Like, the fact of the matter is, they built this robot they called Mr. Invincible, and it's like, you were that, and you're bulletproof. You get to kind of go through life. Like, life is different from you. We've led different lives. You got to go out there, be a superhero. You were literally bulletproof before, and you still kind of are, because the tech is covered in synthetic skin, but it's still there to some extent. And obviously, like, his powers have been heavily reduced, but it's like, yeah, we've been living regular lives, and just especially in Detroit, because yes, there's been good, but there's also been a lot of bad. But Vic's also pushing back, being like, dude, I was mourning my mom. The fact of the matter is, I was trying to figure out who I was. I didn't ask to be Cyborg, because he's like, he was like, you pushed us away. And Vic's like, but you guys never really reached out to me. He's like, why didn't you ever bother trying to find us? Because I think it's a complicated thing of just like, he's like, we've grown and our experiences has shaped us into different men that you want to like, act like, you want to pick up where things were all those years ago, probably, most likely back when we were in high school before your accident. But it's like, we aren't those same people anymore. The fact of the matter is, we've all grown into different people. And our experiences have shaped us. You can't really compare with our experience because you've been doing this whole superhero thing, which, to be fair, in Vic's case, it's not like he really asked that. That whole thing was kind of thrust upon him by his dad. And so I'm sure his dad didn't help with it. Like, I mean, Vic probably felt like, right, I have to push everyone away just because I have to isolate myself. Because, like, I don't, it's his way of dealing with things. Plus his dad probably really shoving the superhero thing kind of down his throat. So there's levels of complexity with that, which it seems like by the end of it, him and Derek are better at the end of it. But I think it was still kind of a necessary thing for Vic to kind of have that perspective of like, yeah, just because you want to get a body like closest back to what you had before. That's the problem. Are you living your life now, or are you trying to get back the life you didn't have? Because Derek was like, right, you can't make up for all that time you've been gone. The way Derek kind of talks about it is like, oh yeah, it's been like 10 years. So it's like, we can't make up for that time. And maybe Vic has spent so much time trying to do that, trying to make up for that time, rather than just being like, hey, I want to just live my life. But now he's trying to play catch up to some extent. And it's like, no, like, you can't just like rewind time, like just be like, yo, let's pick up where we left off. It's like, we are very different people from where where we were. So I think that's such an interesting circumstance for Vic to kind of come face to face with, you know? And once again, let's not forget what future Vic had told him. It's like, right, you're not ready to hear what I have to tell you. Like, he's like, because I lived where you were. Like, I know you can't have it all, you know? And maybe these are the steps and the roads that Vic needs to take to get to future Vic's perspective on things, to be like, right, I recognize that now, that I can't have everything, that not everything's going to click the way I want it to, you know? Before I just chalked it up to, right, you can't just do the superhero thing and have the normal life. You want to try and have everything, but something's going to have to be sacrificed, because you can't still just do the cyborg thing without being cyborg. You know, that's how I kind of interpret that, which, I mean, obviously that's a larger superhero conversation of, especially in the DC universe, of like, you know, because I feel like, and, you know, Marvel does it too, but I feel like obviously it's a big part of DC's characters of identity. It's like your superhero persona typically is who you are. Your secret identity is the mask. It's the whole conversation. That's always been a perspective. That's been my perspective on DC for a couple years now, because I never had that perspective until I've heard people put that perspective out. I was like, oh, I would have never seen DC through that lens if someone never had said that before. And I always thought that was kind of an interesting way of viewing that. So, I mean, truth be told, is Doom Patrol's, like, out of any show, probably leans into that the most, the whole element of identity. So, Rita in particular is kind of lamenting the fact that she's, you know, had the leadership role taken by a complete stranger, you know? It's like, well, not a stranger to you, because this is the person you knew with the Sister of the Dada, till she screwed you over, but also she's a stranger to the rest of the Doom Patrol. I mean, she rolled up, had no memories last season, so, you know, this is someone you didn't know, and you chose her over me. Rita, who we've known each other, not just for a little bit, like, obviously, like, her and Larry have known each other for decades. The fact is, like, right, she's known Jane for just as long, and Cliff as well. But, I mean, they probably didn't really, like, fully connect, because I'm sure, like, Cliff kind of kept to himself in a lot of that time frame. But it's like, yeah, you are all, like, the misfits under Niles' tutelage. It's weird to kind of refer to it as, but, you know, it wasn't really tutelage. Under his quote-unquote care, you know, so... Either way, Rita ends up getting sent, and it's like, oh, Cloverton, we're having this Rita retrospective on, like, her movie history. And I'm like, well, for one, people don't like you. And even later on, Cliff even said himself, it's like, no one in this town likes us. It's like, yeah. I mean, typically when you guys are involved, some devastation happens. People get dead, devastation. So, like, it's not great having you guys around, so... But Rita goes, and sadly, she's the only one. I even love that it's like, oh, even when Madame Rouge was reading it about how, like, oh yeah, the Hollywood star, like, debatable, or something like, she said something like that. Questionable is the exact wording she used about, like, Rita's stardom and her fame. Like, how many movies has Rita actually done? They had a few, like, maybe, like, 5 or so on the post. I'm like, I wonder if that's all she's ever done. I don't want to, like, minimize someone's career and stuff like that. But, obviously, like, Rita was on her way to stardom in her eyes. But, obviously, we know the whole persona of Rita Farr is such a complicated space for her. You know, everything with her mom, like, sleeping with producers to get her the role she had, you know, and, like, Rita Farr being, like, isn't even who she really is. It's, you know, like I said, it's the persona she created for her acting career, you know, so a lot of that stuff she kind of dealt with, and I want to say that was season 2 we found out about all that stuff. I believe, yeah, it had to be, like, season 2 and stuff, I believe. Maybe it was season 3 and I'm just not remembering correctly. Either way, just once again, putting all that aside, Rita ends up getting sucked into her movies, which initially she's like, what's going on here? But then she started leaning into it, and I love the whole thing of, like, right, she's kind of breaking the script, because she's like, oh, you're going to take me away. She's like, no, do it again, but convince me. And he's like, damn it, just stick to the lines. And you're like, whoa, what's going on here? So Rita's not the only one from the movie that's stuck. How long have these other people been stuck inside these movies? I mean, they look about the same. Rita obviously hasn't aged because of her circumstances, which this season's going to, you know, talk about. The fact is that they haven't aged. But the fact is, these people haven't aged either. So they're all trapped in the movie too, which once again, like when you get, like, I love this because this episode definitely reminded me of like something. It's a very Doom Patrol episode, which, yes, everything about Doom Patrol is very Doom Patrol, but it also kind of gives me that same vibe as like Legends of Tomorrow, like, because obviously they were stuck in TV shows and stuff like that, especially later on when they get to, was it Spartan 452 or something like that, because I thought that in the trailer, I was like, oh, is that supposed to be like a spoof of Star Trek or something? Even Cliff was like, hey, really, I didn't know you were in Star Trek. It's like, no, this is Spartan 452. It was actually Rita's first box office failure, and she's just staring at him. He's like, yeah, but that's neither here nor there. She's like, sure, thanks, Larry. But I love that Madame Rouge tried to, like, she was trying to give Larry advice about him kind of letting Key go and moving on, but it's like, right, before you give advice, maybe you should make things right with the one person you hurt the most, Rita. So she's all about like, right, let's make this kind of a trust exercise, and let's start by being there for Rita. It's a movie retrospective and stuff like that, so let's all go. Because once again, as Larry puts it, everyone's dealing with their thing. Larry's dealing with the whole Keek situation. He's kind of tired of the kid, like, doing his thing. Then you got Cliff still being like, yeah, I murdered a butt, as well as murdered a zombie, and that's the thing I feel, because he's like taping up the oven mitt because he doesn't even want to like be tempted to take it off again. Doesn't even want it to slip off. And Jane, trying to figure out her own purpose, got a, nice orgasm from Shelly stopping by. But it's like, well, was that real? Was that not? And her and Cliff had that conversation about, he's like, oh, like the fact is an orgasm is like one of the best feelings in the world. He's like, yeah, if you had to put it on a list of feelings, that's numero uno. Which is also like, yeah, but you're probably not the best person to say that, considering, like, I'd say you were a sex addict, all the cheating you did and all the sex you were having with other women. Like, it's probably not the best for you to kind of talk about that, but it's also like, you're kind of the best person to talk about it, considering you've been a brain inside of a giant robot, not being able to feel or touch, more so like feel, for like decades. So it's like, yeah, so. But it ends up being that conundrum for Jane where it's like, no, I can't like be so caught up in what I like. It doesn't matter. I have to be there for Kay. But it's like, no, what do you want? But it's like, yeah, what Kay wants is important. But it's like, right, it's coming in conflict with her, being told like, hey, maybe you need to find your new purpose. So, and that's what the season's all about, them all finding their new purpose, especially because they think like, hey, we avoided the apocalyptic butt situation, which obviously that's still in play. They're just not aware of it. I do love them being in going from like the romantic movie to like the horror movie. And it's just like, oh, like, come on, you have powers. Like, why are you freaking out? It's like, well, you're literal made of rubber. It's like, yeah, it's just some kid. It's like, yes, but it's a horror movie. And we all know how creepy kids are in these type of movies. So it's like, they're freaked out, hiding in a closet. Larry ends up meeting a guy who later on reveals himself to be Mr. 104. But what I thought was interesting, obviously, the actor is, and I always feel bad because I want to say it's Senhil Ramamurthy, I think is how I hope I'm not butchering his last name. I've seen him in a multitude of things. There's actually so many interesting connects and stuff like that when you think about it. But the fact is he's in this as Mr. 104. I'll get to that in a second. But I think it's interesting too because if you don't know, he was also in another DC property. He was in The Flash as Bloodwork. So I was like, oh, that's interesting how that works out. But it's also fascinating too because the reason why I was like, oh, there's a DC connect. It's like, well, he was in the show Beauty and the Beast with Kristen Kruk. I always feel like I'm butchering her last name too because in my head I always say like Kruick, but I don't know if that's actual proper pronunciation. Who played Lana in Smallville. So it's like, once again, the connections there, regardless. He ends up talking about Larry's circumstances of like, yeah, I mean, just kind of like, he's very, well, it actually, interestingly enough, kind of ties into all of them, actually, because they've all kind of had things that have kind of kept people at a distance. Like, obviously, Vic has, been able to kind of do the more feeling situation of like touching. But the others, like Rita, Larry, Cliff, and Jane, have never really had that contact for different reasons. Well, for one, Cliff can't feel anything. Jane even said, like, the whole thing with Shelly, she's like, it was so tender and gentle, and she's like, I've never been touched by anyone or anything like that, which is also kind of sad too when you actually think about it, because it's like, right, such a tender touch or whatever, it's like something she's never really experienced in her life. I mean, obviously, this type of touch, you're like, you'd want it, but it's like, I don't know, to me, there's a sad connotation to that being like, right, like no one's ever touched her in such a tender, loving way before. But, it's like, maybe there's been loving touches, but never to such a gentle extent. Larry can't touch people because it's like, right, if I bandage myself, like, I'll end up, like, killing people from radiation. I'm sure Rita, with her, once again, she describes it, blob self and stuff like that, probably hasn't really, she had that with Marcus and everything, so I think but, like, Larry and Cliff, and I think even Jane to some extent, kind of in that interesting spot when it comes to, like, touch and being touched type of situation and feeling, and I think that's such an interesting situation for them to be in. Because I kind of skipped over the fact is that, right, they all got sucked into the movies as well, and I love that Rouge is the only one that managed to escape, as she's, like, lamenting everything, and obviously she's going through the files trying to figure out what this is all about, because she's like, she recognizes Dr. Janice's names, go through Niall's files, and she's like, you fucking prick, you can't even give me the damn answers, you asshole. I love it. Like, she's just like drinking herself silly, and it's like, now you're officially part of the Doom Patrol, because you can't be a part of the Doom Patrol without drinking your problems away and just finding a vice to kind of drown your sorrows in the so sexy self-loathing. It's like, you can't be part of the Doom Patrol without sweet self-loathing. But it's like, obviously I'm saying that jokingly, but also it's like a really depressing aspect that everyone shares amongst the Doom Patrollers about, that whole situation. So her lamenting so much about herself in that regard, her mistakes. It's like, cool. I kind of screwed over Cliff. I've just stamped so many people, turning them into weapons. I screwed Rita over before. Then I killed Marcus, fucking her over again. So I kept drinking and drinking. It's like, right, when the Doom Patrol comes back, I'll fix things. I'll make everything right. I'll put Rita back in charge, because that's where she needs to be. She deserves to be the leader of this bunch of misfit vagabonds. So. But Janice's ultimate goal was it seems like this is all related to the Immortus stuff, but she is taking something from Rita, because she's an emotional vampire, but she feels no empathy or something like that, but she's trying to steal something. She said something from Rita that was never hers to begin with, and you're like, what the hell is that about? And now I'm sitting here talking about, I'm like, wait, does this have to do with the immortality? Like, I guess that's what it might be, like, them not aging, like, all of them? Or maybe specific ones, like maybe Larry. I mean, once again, I said it in my trailer discussion. I mean, Cliff, regardless of being in a robot, he has a brain, and you would think, like, a brain would eventually, like, wither or something like that, or decay and all that time, but it's like, no, you've kept going, like, your brain hasn't aged and eventually died or whatever. So maybe this all ties back to the whole thing of the Immortus thing of, like, as Kip says in the trailer, of, why you became immortal in the first place. Like, it's something maybe Niles did, and now Immortus is taking that back to rise again. It's like, right, your immortality, maybe it's almost like there's so many examples I can use. The source of all evil in, like, Charmed, and let's use a reboot, they sealed it back, and then they broke the pieces of it again, because that was how they scattered the pieces to, like, the source of all evil, right? It's like, what if that's Immortus? Like, maybe Niles, took pieces of them and put it inside of maybe Cliff, Jane, Larry, and Rita. It's interesting that she went after Rita first. I mean, I guess it's also like poetic because it's like, right, using your movies to kind of bring out these emotions in you. I felt so bad when she ripped into that creepy kid being like, oh, like it's not that scary because I remember you were constantly pooping your pants on set, which was kind of creepy in its own regard and kind of made this, because like Rita remembers the movie and like, it's like, I still have nightmares about this movie. But it was the fact that Janice wanted that something specifically from Rita saying like you stole it or whatever. And Rita had a very like nice speech moment, but I do love Jamie like, yeah, that's nice and all, but can you hurry up and save us? But it's like Rita being like, yes, regardless of anything, like I have plenty of reasons to hate Niles, but bringing you knuckleheads into my life, it's not something I regret. Like I love you guys, and despite you choosing a complete stranger over me, I can't live without you, because if you die, I will die with you, because you guys mean that much to me. And all of those emotions is what Janice took and says that Immortus will rise again. And the one helping her, kind of helping her, but also not helping her, is Mr. 104. And circling back to it, I was like, the moment he said that, he was like, oh, the periodic table. I was like, oh, that's what you meant when you were talking about the elements and stuff. And it's like, right. So I looked him up. Obviously, he is a character from the comics. It's a weird thing. He used to be Mr. 103 and then became Mr. 104. I'm like, that's so weird. Was it, I think other alias he's had is like, what was it, Atomic Master or something like that? I thought was a very specific element on the periodic table that he was kind of naming himself after, because 104 is, was it Rutherfordium or something like that? That's the element of the periodic table. So that's why I was wondering, but it's just like, I don't know what that fully relates to when it comes to this particular character. But obviously in the comics, he is a straight up villain, but just kind of reading stuff, it was like, oh, it didn't seem like he was kind of villain it seemed like, well, part of it was him kind of doing this, but it also seemed like he's kind of trapped here by Dr. Janice. So it doesn't seem like he's completely a bad guy. I mean, he did try to save the day in the end. So I guess like now that Dr. Janice is gone, he could help out. Luckily, Keeg showed up because I guess he kind of was looking through the files and saw what Rouge couldn't see, because maybe he could see it past all the stuff that was blacked out during the files that Niles had, and ended up kind of freeing everyone, but instead of going back to Larry, ended up going inside Mr. 104, which I'm wondering what that's going to be about. Him being Mr. kind of like the elements from the periodic table, or just like kind of elemental like that. I'm like, maybe there's some correlation with Keeg, and maybe still don't really know what that's all about. Once again, we don't know what future Keeg told him, so unsure what that's all about. And the rest of the Doom Patrol was able to come back, but sadly, Rita's unconscious. Like, I guess when Dr. Janice took, maybe it's going to be a situation of now they're going to start aging, and like all those years are going to eventually catch up with them without their immortality, or maybe that's the only thing that kept them, like whatever it was that was taken from her that wasn't supposed to be hers is now like, or maybe it's kind of not even just like emotions, like you kind of took her very essence, her soul to some extent. I don't know if that's the route they're kind of going down with that, but it is definitely going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.